It was a rough night. I'm Joseph. This is Input English. Of course, today's episode is all about comprehensible input. If you can understand what I am saying, if you can follow the discussion, you will absorb the English language. It is by far the best way to acquire English. So let's start with a little story, and then we'll discuss the implications of what happened. The story occurred last night. I started with the statement, "It was a rough night," and that summed it up rather well. It was a rough night. It was difficult. Last night appeared to be an ordinary night. I was unaware that anything was going to happen, but at 1 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened by a loud noise. I was the only one who noticed the noise. Some people can sleep through loud noises. Other people are quick to wake up. I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning, actually a couple of minutes before 1 o'clock. The reason I know what time it was is when I woke up, I immediately glanced at the digital alarm clock, and it showed that it was just before 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, initially, I didn't know why I woke up. I knew I was awake. I knew it was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning, but I wasn't certain why I woke up. I had a vague recollection of a noise. Almost immediately, there was a lightning flash outside. I could see it through the bedroom window. I didn't see the actual lightning strike. What I saw was a flash of light. Now, at that point, I instinctively started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I got to 5, I heard thunder. So there was a 5-second delay between the flash of light and the sound of thunder. Now, we know that at sea level, the speed of sound is about 1,100 feet per second. We also know that for human purposes, we can assume that the speed of light is infinite. It is so much greater than the speeds that we encounter on the Earth. Our calculations don't really need to take into account the delay created by the finite speed of light. So assuming that the speed of light is infinite, and assuming that the speed of sound is roughly 1,100 feet per second, we have a very easy way to estimate the distance of a lightning strike from our point of observation. The rule of thumb, that is the rough estimate that is super useful, is 5 seconds per mile. It's not accurate to the foot, but it's a very easy way to estimate distance from the lightning strike. So, given that there was a 5-second delay between the flash and the sound, I assumed that the lightning struck about 1 mile from the house. Now, that might for some people be fairly comforting, but for me it was not. We live in a wooded area, and the woods extend for many miles in all directions. This time of year, with very dry conditions and a lot of fuel on the ground in the forests, we are at risk for wildfires if there are lightning strikes. Many times this is not a big problem because a lightning storm may be associated with a lot of rain, and that wets the foliage and makes fires less likely. However, we've had very little rain, and to my knowledge, we had no rain yesterday at all. So when the lightning struck within a mile of our house, that gave me fear because of an experience we had 5 years ago. I made a video about that experience. It was the same scenario. I had a sensation of Deja vu. Okay, so that's worthy of some explanation. You might quickly identify that deja vu is not English, but we use it in English. It's a French phrase, and it is used in English. It's used for a variety of reasons. The reason I used it today is, one, I wanted to showcase it, and two, it was a very concise way of explaining what I was trying to get across. The point I was trying to make was very concisely stated by using the French phrase déjà vu. Déjà vu means seen again. In English use, what we mean is that we get the sensation or the experience of doing something or seeing something the same again. It reminds us of something in our past. So last night I had a real sensation of deja vu because 5 years ago there was a lightning storm that woke me up from a sound sleep, but the lightning continued. There was no rain associated with these lightning strikes. And so many wildfires were started within miles of our house. These wildfires quickly got out of control, and there were big problems with these out of control wildfires. In less than 2 days after that 2020 lightning storm, we had to evacuate our house. We had to leave because the authorities locally had determined that we could get overrun by the fire. An out of control forest fire can result in death if people try to stay and hope for the best. So we evacuated. We had 2 days to prepare. I took time off from work. We drove some valuables and some documents to a friend's house because they lived outside this fire zone. They were not threatened. I put some musical instruments in my office. Again, the office was not in the fire zone, plus the office is a commercial building, so it has a sprinkler system. It's unlikely that the office in which I worked would burn to the ground and destroy my instruments. When we evacuated, we left in the middle of the night and we drove about 40 miles. We spent that first night in a hotel because we felt that it was impractical to try to check into a campground at 1 o'clock in the morning. Mind you, this was 5 years ago. We stayed in that campground for about a week. And again, I have described this in a previous video, which I will link at the end. Last night, I had a true sensation of deja vu. All the details were roughly the same, and I had the feeling that it was just happening again. So what happened? Well, I couldn't get back to sleep. There was no point in waking up the wife, so I got out of bed and I looked around. I looked out the front door to see if there was any light that would suggest a forest fire, and I saw nothing. I listened for sirens, because if we have fires in the area, people will alert the fire department and the first responders will come and deal with the fire. When a first responder is going to an emergency, they usually use a siren. And I heard no sirens. That was good news. I then went out on the back deck and looked around, again, looking for light suggesting fire and listening for sirens. I didn't see or hear any such things. What I did notice is that it was raining. It was actually fairly comical. I am standing there on our deck in my pajamas in the rain. I was thrilled that it was raining. That was great news. Also, when I was on the deck, I didn't see any lightning flashes, and I didn't hear any thunder. Perhaps this storm is moving on. I went back to bed. The next challenge was to get back to sleep. After all, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, way too early to get up. So I needed to get back to sleep. But that was no easy task. My sleep was interrupted. I was wide awake. I was solving problems, analyzing risk. I was on edge. I was focused. And that's not a great posture from which to initiate restful sleep. So what happened? I tossed and turned for an hour. When people are trying to get to sleep and they're failing to do so, and this is a problem for them, in English we describe that as tossing and turning, trying to find a comfortable position, trying to get into a configuration that will allow sleep to resume. So I tossed and turned for 1 hour. How do I know this? The digital alarm clock had a very handy display to tell me how long it was. At one point, I considered getting up and watching some videos in Spanish. That was quickly identified as a really bad idea because having no sleep would certainly result in me being very symptomatic the following day. I want to be alert. I want to be able to function, and getting no sleep does not foster good alertness and good function during the next day. Actually, if one loses a big chunk of a night's sleep, they may not function well for a couple of days. This is similar to jet lag. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. So that's what happened. I eventually got to sleep. I slept in until 6 a.m. Now, sleeping in until 6 may sound like I got up really early, but my usual is to get up between 4 and 5 to get the day started. I'm an early riser. Some people refer to themselves as night owls, but I'm an early riser. I like to get up early. And so for me, sleeping in until 6 was an extra hour of sleep. That made up for the sleep I lost between 1 and 2 in the morning. Even though I had a sensation of deja vu, it really was not exactly the same. We did not have lightning strikes starting forest fires. We did not see wildfires developing in the area, and we are not likely to be evacuated because of that lightning storm. So it is actually different. When I was thinking about that French term, deja vu, I started thinking about why we would put French terms into the English language. There are a couple of ways to look at that. One is the English language is full of French vocabulary, and that can be traced back to the Norman Conquest. In 1066, French-speaking Normans invaded England, conquered England, and became the government. They became the ruling class. And so for a very long time, affairs of state and business in England were conducted in French. This resulted in a lot of French vocabulary, French expressions being inserted into the English language. But in that case, those words were inserted and adapted as part of the English language, so most native English speakers are unaware when they use a word or a phrase that originated in French. It's just part of the English language. On the other hand, when someone uses déjà vu, that has not been inserted into the English language. It's a French phrase that is used and easily identifiable as a French phrase. Why would you want to do that? Why would you switch from English to French for a little short phrase? What's the point? Well, there are a couple. Some people do this to put on airs. Some people might feel that if they can include some clever French expressions into the things they are saying, they can sound superior, more sophisticated. This strategy of trying to appear to be greater than one actually is described as putting on airs. I assure you, I was not putting on airs. So what other reason might one have to use a French phrase in English? The answer is brevity. Déjà vu is a very concise phrase that would be more difficult to express in English. I can say I had a sense of déjà vu, or I could have a sense that what was happening really reminded me of something that had happened in the past, and it felt very much the same. So that English description is very big, and déjà vu is very concise. That's a good reason to use that term déjà vu. Are there other French phrases that find their way into English? Certainly. There are lots of them, but I don't want to try to teach lists of words or lists of phrases. I don't want to tempt the viewers to write things down in a notebook. I don't want people to memorize anything I say. I just want to tell stories about the language, about these expressions, and let you absorb it in context with comprehensible input. That's the name of the game here. But there is an example of another French phrase which I think is really fun. It gives me another brief story. The other phrase is je ne sais quoi. Je ne sais quoi can be translated into English as I don't know what. But the way we use it is when we are faced with describing something that is difficult to put into words. You might say that someone you met had that certain je ne sais quoi, that certain something that's hard to put into words. And then to a greater or lesser degree, in your discussion on that topic, you might add some details. He seemed very articulate. He was very confident. Talking to him was very comforting and pleasant. But a summary of that could be, he had a certain je ne sais quoi. Again, people might use that term to put on airs. I don't subscribe to that. Or it could just be very concise. That's why I would use it. It's also an opportunity for a joke. I have heard more than once somebody say, she had that certain je ne sais quoi, but I don't know what it is. In other words, they use the French phrase and then translate it into English as if they're unaware of what je ne sais quoi means. It's just a little play on words, and it's very lighthearted. I have found myself on occasion saying, they had a certain je ne sais quoi, but I don't know what it is. Humor is very welcome in most places, as long as it's in relatively good taste. The wildfires of 2020 were miserable. My wife and I, as well as many people we knew, were faced with a lot of fear. My wife expressed her fears by pointing out that she had the mental image of her piano burned to a crisp in the basement, having fallen through a destroyed house, having fallen through the main floor into the basement. She had a mental image of the wreckage of her piano smoldering in the basement after the house burned down. That never happened, but she very graphically described her fear of the fire. Now, to put that in perspective, a piano is just an object. It was an object that she really adored, but the perspective is a piano is a thing, and it's not nearly as precious as people or our animals, for instance. Pianos can be replaced, usually. During the time we were evacuated, the air in this area was miserable. The sky was a dull reddish gray. It was difficult to breathe. There were advisories on the media that people should not go out of doors, should wear masks, and should avoid exercising out of doors. Jogging at a time like that would be very ill-timed. Over time, I became aware of people I knew, people I worked with, who lost their homes in that fire. They evacuated, but when they came back, their home no longer existed. It burned to the ground. There was indeed loss of life in that fire as well. People tried to stay and just wait for the fire to pass, but unfortunately they got trapped and it cost them their life. We were very fortunate. We evacuated. I was able to continue going to work. My wife busied herself in the trailer and walking around in the camping area where we were staying. She had a car so she could go to the store. We had plenty of food. It wasn't a great hardship. We had good internet. And then we were able to return home. When we got home, the house was intact. There wasn't anything wrong with it because the fires only came within about 7 miles of the house. Under windy conditions with out-of-control fires, a 7-mile margin of safety might sound like a lot of distance, but it's not. A fire can cover 7 miles very quickly. Like I said, we were fortunate. After the fires, there was a response. People and governments realized that we needed to do things a little differently. The homeowners in our area got together and had some meetings, and they contacted local officials to get support, and we created a program to make our homes and the area where we lived safer with respect to wildfires. We wanted to create a defensible space around each home so that if there was a wildfire in the forests around us, that we would have a chance of defending our home against that fire as it advanced. We cut a lot of brush and cleared a lot of space around the house as a defensible space. There were some negative aspects of the response to those fires. Some insurance companies were exposed to paying out a lot of benefits on the policies they had written, and they sustained some losses. You might say those losses were predictable and should have been part of their business plan. What we saw is that some insurance companies canceled insurance policies after the fact, refusing to write policies for homeowners in our area. This resulted in some people having to find a new insurance company to get homeowners insurance and fire insurance for their homes. That usually resulted in increased insurance expense. Our insurance company did not cancel our policy, did not raise our rates. Nothing really happened with us. It would probably be good to mention that people who live in the suburbs sometimes want to move out into wilder, more natural areas. And so we see people moving out to places like where we live. It is foreseeable that if one moves out into a forest, that there are going to be consequences. Exposure to wildfires is one of them. Exposure to wildlife is another. We have mountain lions and coyotes in our area. We have seen them. They're not uncommon. But people who have historically lived in the suburbs sometimes are shocked when they come out into an area that is less populated and find that they are in the midst of predators like mountain lions and coyotes. The point I would make about people moving out into less populated areas is they shouldn't really be surprised when they encounter predators and exposure to wildfires. These are foreseeable consequences for moving out into these less populated areas. As I look back to the events of last night, the only consequence was that I experienced some fear at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I lost an hour of sleep, which I made up for by sleeping in an extra hour in the morning. This experience brought to mind a paraphrased quote from Seneca. Seneca tells us that we suffer more in our imagination than we do in reality. That was certainly true last night. I reviewed all sorts of catastrophic consequences for the lightning storm, but when it was all said and done, nothing happened. I can conclude that my 1 hour loss of sleep was for nothing. At the time, I didn't know that. Sleep loss is an interesting problem. Whether we like it or not, we need to dedicate roughly 8 hours each day to getting restful sleep. This is important for us to maintain our health, and it's important for us to maintain a high level of function. If one loses a big segment of sleep in the middle of the night, that can result in one feeling quite badly for the next day or more, and it can decrease our ability to function. We're not at our best if we're sleep deprived. So how did I adapt to that? Well, I told you I slept in an extra hour, and that pretty much mitigated the problem. It pretty much took care of it. The other thing I thought about doing but didn't was have an extra cup of coffee. Coffee, of course, contains caffeine. It's a stimulant. People use it to wake up, and I enjoy a cup of coffee in the morning. I usually only have one, but it occurred to me that if I needed to be more alert, that maybe a second cup of coffee would be just the ticket. I thought about it, and I didn't make it. The only real consequence of the lightning storm and my inability to get a good, uninterrupted night of sleep was that we got this discussion. We got this video. It developed completely from that experience of being awakened at 1 o'clock in the morning by a loud clap of thunder. I invite comments below, and if you like videos like this, be sure to click on this one next. See you soon.